Hey, Jen here, and in today's video we're going to talk about what happens to us as human beings when we enter into a traumatized state. So in my previous video in this series, I defined psychological trauma. If you haven't watched that video, you might want to watch that one first and then come on over here and watch this video. But just to recap, psychological trauma is a shock, wound, or injury to the mind that mobilizes our innate survival systems because we think that some aspect, or we don't think, but we feel on a deeply embodied primal level, we have this conviction that some aspect of our physical, mental, or emotional survival is at risk. And so this mobilizes our survival systems, and we enter into what is known as a trauma world or a traumatized state. And when we enter into this, and we're going to get into what happens when we enter into this world, this space, our life, our way of experiencing ourselves and the world around us is fundamentally different. It's totally different than what it would have been had we not been traumatized. Okay, so when we're traumatized, our whole experience of ourselves and the world around us, the way we interact with the world is fundamentally different. So it's like we enter into this new world. And that's why it's so difficult when we live in this traumatized state. It's so difficult to see our trauma because we're living within this world and it becomes all we know, basically. So let's talk about what happens when these survival systems get activated and what it's like to enter into and live in a trauma world. So what happens is three things. First, it mobilizes our fear system. Like, we do not want to be traumatized again. So we have this hugely mobilized fear system. We become extremely afraid of being re-traumatized. We will do anything to not experience the same thing that we just experienced. Okay, so if that thing is being shamed, we do not want to experience being shamed again. We will do anything. We will change who we are. We will be who somebody wants us to be because we don't want to experience shame again, because that is what mobilized this survival system in the first place. So fear is big. And this is why traumatized human beings often have chronic anxiety. They have, startle reflexes that are really hypersensitive, often social anxiety, phobias, all sorts of things. So really activated fear system is a sign of traumatization, being in a trauma world. The other system that gets activated is this dissociative system. So we need to cope, right? Like, the trauma and the impacts of trauma are so painful, are so far-reaching in our psyche that we need to find a way of coping. And one way to cope is to separate from either parts of ourselves or that we're traumatized. We got to cut them off because we can't always be feeling that pain that is just so, it would be re-traumatizing to feel that extreme pain again. So it's like we cut it off. So for example, if you find yourself going, I feel numb sometimes, that's a common feeling from being traumatized, or you hide parts of yourself. That is really common. So that's a way of dissociating from perhaps a shamed part of the traumatized part, or you have deep pain that maybe you numb with alcohol, drugs, sex, different things like that. So you're trying to numb. Internet, workaholic tendencies, perfectionism. These are all signs of trying to escape from painful parts of yourself that you cannot embody because they're too linked to the trauma. And the third system is shame. There is always shame with trauma. When we are traumatized, we feel like we're broken. We feel broken on some level. We're ashamed. We feel often like something's wrong with us. Perhaps we instigated or created the event that caused us trauma. There's always shame with trauma. And so often, particularly for those of us that experienced hidden kinds of trauma, which I talked about in the last video, there's so much shame in, why am I so messed up? I mean, I didn't experience some horrific event, I didn't experience overt abuse, and yet I'm so messed up, I'm so traumatized. That in and of itself is shaming. And so fear, dissociation, and shame are the experience of being traumatized. So when we experience a traumatizing event and then we enter into a trauma world and we're traumatized, our world is made up of fear of re-traumatization, dissociating from the pain, the agony of being traumatized, and then shame, feeling like we're broken, like we're never good enough, something's wrong with us, why am I so messed up? And we don't realize that that is the human response to trauma, to psychological trauma. That's the human response, to mobilize these systems. And when we don't know this, we stay locked in this world, and it is self-perpetuating, because when we're ashamed of ourselves, we create an internally shaming environment. When we dissociate and we numb ourselves with alcohol, drugs, that in and of itself creates more shame, creates more disconnection from who we are, which is in and of itself traumatizing. When we are afraid of social situations because we've been traumatized in social situations and we avoid them, we create more fear of social situations, more awkwardness when we're around other people, more traumatization, because we create that traumatizing experience that we're so desperately trying to avoid. So what I want you to get from this video is that when we experience a traumatizing experience or event, we enter into a world that is fundamentally different than the one we would have lived in had we not been traumatized. That world is made up of these activated systems within us, these survival systems that are based on fear of re-traumatization, dissociating from the pain, from the suffering, and shame, feeling like we're broken inside. So that's what I'm going to leave you with today. We're going to dive deeper in this series, but for now, that's enough. What I want to do now is leave you to let me know in the comments below what you got from this video. If you have any questions, I want to interact with you in the comments down there. So please leave a comment if you feel so inclined. Give me a thumbs up if you got value from this video. Let me know by giving me a thumbs up. And if you want to stay in the loop and be notified when I release new videos each and every week, hit the subscribe button and the little bell next to it, and YouTube will notify you conveniently whenever I release any new videos. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being brave enough to have this conversation with me, and I look forward to sharing a whole lot more with you in the near future.